for the child should be human-centered, not a human machine, a cyborg operation like we see in some of these 21st century sci-fi movies. We need kids to be much more active learners. They need to be the ones doing the work in the classroom. The teacher is a facilitator, an inspirer, a motivator, a guide, an explorer, but we need the kids to do the work. One teacher cannot bring in enough knowledge to keep kids up to the 21st century standards.
I truly believe that education can and is a powerful way for us to empower and mobilize us. Education can give us the tools to address a problem at work, school, or in our personal life. It can give you specific information about your profession, hobby, community, and/or collective. We should also consider the aesthetics and how people captured the feelings of education. By looking at the aesthetics, art decisions, and culture, history, and politics of a given time, we could gain insight on what was important to people in that era specific to learning. One way to explore this is to, as you would guess, focus on tabletop role-playing games about education and edutainment. The game that comes to mind about this topic is MindExplorer. So today, we'll be discussing how its art and mechanics explore the Utopian Scholastic aesthetic. First, we'll discuss the aesthetics, themes, and symbols that were core to Utopian Scholastic. Secondly, we'll talk about how the game has cultural and emotional signifiers that were important to education in the 90s and 2000. And thirdly, we'll talk about the history and culture of the 90s and how that may have influenced Utopian Scholastic. Through this, you'll be able to learn about a niche indie game that explores the boons and banes of 80s to 90s education and consumer culture via a tabletop game. So players, please take a seat over there at your desk because class is about to get started. Be sure to grab your pencils and pens, and don't forget to sign in on the attendance sheet underneath the like and subscribe button because we are exploring the Utopian Scholastic aesthetic in MindExplorer. MindExplorer is a single-player / solo tabletop role-playing game inspired by the aesthetics of educational materials from the 1980s to the year 2000, as stated on the itch.io page. Michael made the game and was published on August 15th, 2020. In terms of game inspirations, it pulls from systems like Alone Amongst the Stars by Takuma Okada and Enter the Orb by Turtle Bun. In terms of accessing the game, MindExplorer is easily accessible online. Michael sells the game for $2 on itch.io. If you aren't able to afford it, there are plenty of community copies available as well. The game has also been in a number of itch.io bundles throughout the years. The Creative Commons Jam, the Showcase Jam of 2020, Gamer Games Game Jam, say that 3 times fast, the Palestinian Relief Bundle, and Crips for eSims for Gaza. I suspect and hope this game is in future bundles, and I got it from the Palestinian Relief Bundle back early last year, and I've been playing this game and reading through it multiple times. The game only comes down to 5 pages, so it's easily accessible, and you can play this in 1 to 2 hours at minimum. But it's still chock full of inspiration due to its main dice mechanic, art dice. Dice systems can emphasize ways that developers want you to play or break the game. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition uses its D20 because it is firstly an iconic dice that's easily accessible, aka you can buy it online. Plus, the D20 and its system uses simple add or subtract modifier. For example, if I roll a D20 plus a modifier of 1 or 2, or negative a modifier of 1 or 2, all you have to do is just roll and add or subtract. There's a lot of accessibility in terms of just opening a game and knowing that all you need is a D20. Obviously, 5e is a little bit more complicated than that, but games like Morkborg, Cyborg, or any of the board games or OSR games benefit greatly from the D20 being easily accessible, easily affordable, and there are options for it online and offline. Some games, like Deadlands, For the Queen, Fiasco, and Capers, use card-based systems as their resolution. Card-based systems can be used often like an oracle/fortune for the players or for the facilitator. To add, playing cards contain more information than a common dice like a d6, and in some games provide another resource management element if, say, dice are not the main focus. Cannibal Halfling Gaming goes into detail on this if you want to know more. Thus, playing cards, like with dice, have unique parameters that designers can use to achieve a specific result or play style. Finally, we have games that use Jenga like Dread, or no dice at all with systems like No Dice, No Masters, or Belonging Outside Belonging. These, specifically Belonging Outside Belonging, are diceless, MC-less, and distributed games that focus on collaborative world building and intentionally create communities and worlds for and by marginalized groups. These games include Avery Alder's Dreams Askew and Dream Apart, Wander Home, Psycho Dungeon, and Balak Bayan are some examples. The point of these systems are to push the narrative that you need dice or cards at all to play or run a tabletop role-playing game. Games like Dread, on the other hand, use unique resolution systems like Jenga to give a sense of dread and foreboding and fear, and are unique in the field of tabletop role-playing games. Ultimately, though, these dice systems push you into playing a certain way. And in the case of the art dice emphasize creativity and exploring knowledge. The art dice comes from the RPG Sink to Swim by World Champ Game Co. In the game, there is a unique custom 6-sided dice that have unique illustrations on all of the sides. These symbols will determine your world building, response, and what you encounter when playing Sink to Swim. For instance, I could roll a tree, hammer, and cup of coffee. These rolls will determine and influence the narrative, my response, and what my characters or character will experience. This logic also applies to MindExplorer. In the case of MindExplorer, I think the combo of art dice and prompt-specific questions allow for a lot of creativity, thus enforcing the aesthetic and the gameplay loop. For this game, supplies will be pretty straightforward. You will need to either create the art dice yourself or use the online dice roller by Michael. Afterwards, the game suggests using a printout of a hex grid to keep track of your travel and a notebook and writing implement to keep track of notes. I personally opted out of the hex, by the way, and instead rolled a d6 to state how many journal entries I would make for my character. The gameplay loop consists of you exploring the mind maze. Before you enter, though, you must roll 4 art dice and assign them to these 4 prompts. Layout of the island, how did you arrive on the island, the appearance of the building in question, but it is the mind maze, and what compels you to go inside this building. Assign the art on each roll and use it as inspiration for your main character on what they see before they journey through the mind maze. From there, your character explores the mind maze from one hex to another. You roll your art dice and answer a set of questions based on audience, appearance, mood, and purpose until you wake up from your dream. The gameplay loop is simple, but allows for a lot of creativity. You can get a lot of mileage for world building from rolling these dice and seeing what your main character learns on their journey. This RPG's low activation energy, free online dice roller, and premise allow for educational experience of self-exploration through what might feel like a utopia. As for the influence, this is from 80s and 90s and 2000 education material, and this is called the Utopian Scholastic aesthetic. The aesthetic was used in edutainment, software, encyclopedias, books, museums, and in instruction/academic material, as well as used in non-academic settings specifically for education or learning purposes. According to Kari Institute, aka Consumer Aesthetic Research Institute, this aesthetic directly pulls from Frostburg, which focused on warm colors and representations of timelessness. Frostbane, or Frostburn, used images of globes, textured paper, and realistic architecture to capture the shift of boomers being able to access wealth underneath capitalism. Utopian Scholastic, meanwhile, uses similar aesthetics, but more focused for kids and education. The terms origins are from Facebook. More specifically, the name of the aesthetic is from Facebook. It came from a group known as Utopian Scholastic Designs from a pre-9/11 world. The group has existed for 8 years and was created by Susie Holt. The aesthetic is about the combination of discovering knowledge in the budding internet while appealing to childlike wonder. The aesthetics fandom page lists some visual cues as well. This is depictions of nature, abstract elements, surrealism, aka art that depicts dreams in some conscious mind. It is usually art that explores dreams to possibly deal with reality or avoid it. For context, surrealism was a result of the harsh reality of post-World War I. School supplies, animals, mathematical symbols, equations, and musical notes. This could include scientific objects, such as distilleries, atoms, periodic tables, beakers, flasks, and a number of scientific items for children and adults. This could include classical architectural columns, and I would also include buildings and historical symbols as well. This also included patterns and other artsy-fartsy like pictures such as textured walls with colorful backgrounds like yellow, red, or bright colors. And in this video, you have likely seen glimpses at Utopian Scholastic. Old videos from PBS and other media have played in the background. Many of these are a collection of videos from Michael Sam, who's collected videos from the era. Of course, if you know about this aesthetic and believe there is something that I missed out from the conversation, let me know down below in the comment section. Overall, the images, symbols, and depictions focus on education and discovery, typically for a young audience, but it could also mean for an older audience. To better grasp why Utopian Scholastic is so hopeful, and more specifically, how it affects MindExplorer's gameplay, we need to look at historical context. We should know a bit of the political, economic, and cultural landscape that informed this consumer aesthetic. And by understanding that, I think we can understand the aesthetic choices and the gameplay loop of MindExplorer. Moving back to the 1990s, politically and economically, this era of time is remembered as a decade of relative peace and prosperity for the Western cis-imperial core. This included the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the US becoming a world power. The US emerged as the current world superpower due to a combination of anti-communist intervention and the collapse and destruction of Russia's status alongside a booming economy. This economic boom was categorized by low unemployment, wage growth, increased productivity, and faster investment industries like technology, especially in the later of the 1990s and 2000, in part due to the dot-com bubble and eventual burst. For instance, IT investment grew from 3% of GDP at the beginning of 1981 to 4.9%, more than 1/3 of the total investment at the end of 2000, as the EPI reported in 2002. In relation to wars, the US is proving its power and dominion by sending troops intervening globally, despite the 90s being looked as quote-unquote peaceful. Some examples of our involvement included the Gulf War, intervening in Kuwait, intervening in Somalia, interventions in Haiti, and military intervention in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Technologically, it is important to understand that access to telecommunication and deepening technology would allow for, well, further communication. The first web browser, called obviously the World Wide Web, was developed in 1990. In the mid-1990s, we saw competition between Microsoft's Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator. This competition gave way to conversations on internet accessibility. Unlike Netscape, Internet Explorer was bundled to Windows OS free of charge, despite Netscape owning 75% of the marketplace at that time. To add, the first SMS text message was sent in 1992, which, by the way, was a simple Merry Christmas message. To add, there was an increase in home entertainment and just access to music and other forms of entertainment during this period. We had tech like pagers, Tamagotchis, Discman, mini disc players, the original Game Boy, PlayStation 1, the original iMac, and so many other pieces of technology. To cap it all off, e-commerce websites like AOL, eBay, and Amazon from 1994 and onwards existed in tandem with instant messaging software alongside all of this increased telecommunication and internet communication. This is all culminated in the dot-com bubble, which saw the rise of internet and tech-based startup companies in the 1990s before the crash in 2002. Thus, there's a lot of technology that improved telecommunication and interaction, as well as access and distribution of information. I also asked a few of my friends who grew up in this 1990s era and 1980s, and some told me some fun stories. Some told me they got their first email in college, and they were getting involved in chat rooms and online gaming. My friend Star, who has been on the channel before, talked about how the internet was an educational tool or resource rather than a necessity. Social media was super limited alongside e-commerce. Third spaces like record stores, libraries, and listening stations had computers and technologies, but physical media was still super important, like newspapers. In a way, there was this air of excitement as this new technology and increased communication came to a variety of people across the US and Western world. I believe these advancements and shifts politically, technologically, and economically reflect a changing cultural zeitgeist. A zeitgeist that felt hopeful about the future, especially those who are living in the imperial core. I think this is emphasized most in the book 90s Generation, which had talked about the specific values that millennials, and to an extent some Gen Xers, had. Anders Partman, a marketing faculty at the University of Innsbruck, discusses the broad characteristics that define the 90s generation. This includes an importance on self-realization at work/their career, being active member of their community, and importance of empowerment personally and community-wise. Diversity and equality are super important to the 90s generation, and key awareness of what is happening around them, as well as a strong desire to be seen and figure out their role in this world. I understand these desires. For millennials and Gen Xers who grew up in that time period, it's not a surprise that the increased communication, diversity, and economic booms, many would have these characteristics in mind, especially before 2001. It is egalitarian-like thinking that millennials were born into and Gen Xers lived through. It is because the world seemed, keyword, seemed peaceful, knowledge seemed broad and expansive, and everything felt like the world wasn't falling apart. In this era, we got technology, brands, music, and organizations, and ideas that Generation Z and just broadly are still referenced, albeit not nearly as optimistic. Let's look at industries like video games in this day and age. Nearly 49% of online gamers are millennials, according to July 2024 from ComScore. If it were not for the advancements of the modern home consoles like N64 and PS1, we would not likely have nearly as awesome, and likely terrible, of an industry as we do in video games. This is to say, the 1990s are perceived as peaceful and innovative time because to a degree, they were for those who could benefit from it or who could shield themselves from all of the violence that was going on outside of the imperial core. It is not a shock to academics, writers, graphic designers, and others in the arts and sciences that a consumer aesthetic like the Utopian Scholastic came to be. Utopian Scholastic captures the glamour and hope of education and discovery that rushed through the internet and onto educators. So we understand that the history around the 80s and 90s informed the aesthetic, and its art focuses on the hopefulness and new technology of that era. In fact, I think this hope and awe from Utopian Scholastic is captured best in the wide variety of art, books, and multimedia released between this consumer aesthetics periods. The first core example of Utopian Scholastic has to be in the books catering to elementary and high school students. For example, publishers like Harcourt Brace, Usborne, Dorling, Kingsley, aka DK, were well-known publishers of that era. Harcourt Brace Publishing had books like its social studies book from 2000, its activity book on early United States social studies, books on reading skills, science anytime, There were books related to health, and some that focused on global history like Living in Our World. There are also books on physical science from Glenn Coe McGraw, literally titled Physical Science. To add, the technological element was there with books teaching young people how to use a computer. Harcourt published a book titled Technology, Integration Guide and Signatures for grades 1 through 6 to help teachers integrate new technologies like computers and CDs into their classrooms when they were obviously new technology. In each of these respective covers, statues and symbols of education are popping out of focus on abstract or surrealist themes. That means that the Statue of Liberty was pointed out with our other symbols of American freedom plastered over in some social studies textbooks. The colors are bright, poppy, and meant to invite young learners in to the wonders of American history. Similarly, the activity book on early United States history has abstract elements combined with American symbols such as historical symbols. Contrasting the blue and purple are symbols of American democracy thrown around playfully. For literature, you have symbols like a clock tower towering over buildings, lights and leaps brought out to give a sense of awe as you look up to all of these amazing objects. While there are no surrealist depictions in, say, Timeless Tales cover, there's a focus on familiar architecture, greenery, and history with its clock tower and warmer color tones. Finally, a book on technology goes for a cooler, more stylish approach while highlighting this new technology. This front cover shows an array of CDs and respective cases behind a blue background. The words Imagine Express are written clearly next to a keyboard and floppy disk. This technology, color palettes, and a focus on education related to rainforests, castles, or neighborhoods really reflect a wide diversity of what education could offer using this new tech. In each of these examples, across subject areas, we see that the Utopian Scholastic aesthetic holds true. Firstly, there is a focus on colorful and bright backgrounds. They may use shades of blue, purple, red, or yellow to appear poppy for a younger audience. Secondly, there are symbols related to architecture, education, nature, or history that are used on the book or on the cover. Finally, there are symbols that are used in abstract or have surrealist elements. This logic of awe and exploration even applies to people interested in learning about the internet. Specifically, this applies to adults and college-age students alike. The development of books like the Internet Bible by Brian Underhall and Internet Explorer 4 Bible by Chris Negus reflect the newness of the internet during that time period. In Internet Bible's multiple covers, it shows the expanse of the internet behind a reddish paper-like background. The globe is the focus of the piece, while other stock images showing what the internet can do are melded to this planet. Some examples include a place of e-commerce, helping you book tickets to your next show. Maybe the internet can help you do mathematical calculations. It can help you access your email and or make sure it's protected. You can search for information. You can file or get a passport, or you can explore your next destination. This same logic applies to Internet Explorer 4's Bible. The image shows the promise of what Internet Explorer has to offer to new users and what the internet has to offer, which is really ironic since, well, it's Internet Explorer. I don't really remember anyone who was using that unless they were like super old. Anyway, other books made for young adults and adults alike share this aesthetic on educational material. For instance, McGraw helped publish a book designed for industrial education. One such book is in their collection called General Metals by John L. Feader. It is a book about metalworking. The book focuses on safety to the various kinds of metals used in production as well as careers in metalworking industry. The cover is on a bluish Tron-like grid with pictures of typical metalworking symbols floating around in this space. It holds a welding mask, screwdriver, nuts and bolts, a thread pitch gauge made specific for Whitworth screws, and yes, I had to Google what that is, and drills floating in this internet-like space. For others, maybe they aren't into metalworking. Maybe they're trying to improve their typing skills. Fortunately, books like Skill Building, Building Speed and Accuracy on the Keyboard are about building up your words per minute or typing skills. The cover has symbols of keyboards with a singular globe planet racing through space. In a weird way, it looks like the famous scene of Luke Skywalker in the ravines of the Death Star in Star Wars A New Hope. Yet, everything is made of keyboards. Yeah, that's pretty surrealist and abstract if you ask me. Moving away from mechanics and technical skills, let's look at some more practical examples. A book called Multiple Intelligences discusses the multiple intelligence theory, which is a pseudoscience that states that human intelligence is broken down to different modalities rather than being a single general intelligence. The books are specific to educators wanting to add this theory into their classroom. The cover shows a variety of images to show multiple forms of intelligence from the pseudoscience. In the background is a purple paper-like texture. In the front are images of a globe, a brain, musical notes, a sea turtle, a rose, an eye, all blended together. It follows a similar abstract style or symbols like the other books that we've talked before. But in all of them, it captures this idea of hope, this idea of creativity, this idea of something new as intelligence, or in this case, this book wants you to believe. As we can see, the Utopian Scholastic is a consumer aesthetic that captured the newness of the internet. The aesthetic is a celebration of education, edutainment, and the warm feelings one would or might get when exploring a museum or learning a new topic in school or from life. MindExplorer replicates that aesthetic and formula to a T. Its use of art dice allows for a wide flexibility of results and creative options and exploration. You can get dogs, eyes, and other sets of symbols, which can tell a specific story for each of the given questions as you fill out the hex map. And this surrealist and abstract dice system, alongside choice images and questions in this game, truly reflect the idea of knowledge and discovery of education in a novel way. It is supposed to feel like an explosion of new information, ideas, and experiences that should feel exciting. Whether you are a high school student writing a book report, a researcher in a wet lab studying the formation of leaves, or a metallurgist in training, the point of Utopian Scholastic and MindExplorer is the celebration and exploration of education and the joys of new technology. But I also think MindExplorer is critical / questions the consumer aesthetic. Personally, Utopian Scholastic highlights the joys of learning, but also shields us from the darker avenues of history and politics, which is pretty common, I think, in how we discuss education. As I dived further and further into the books of the 90s and 2000s, I started to be flooded with memories of my own education. Memories of when I used to take day trips to my favorite museums or aquariums. I used to spend a lot of time admiring history or science, thinking about all the stuff I could learn, wondering if I myself could become that one great leader. Never really realizing until in my college era and my adult era that there's no such thing as a story of this great single individual. And for that matter, I never learned about the darker sides of history or the people that quote unquote lost. Essentially anything post 1960s was unknown. To add, the history coverage was idealistic and simple and pretty patriotic and not critical of the United States or Western countries. It was made for young kids, but even then, I don't think we should avoid these touchy subjects for young kids, or anyone for that matter. Even as a child, I felt like something was missing. I wasn't getting the full picture, and it bothered me to some degree. As a kid, I obviously didn't know how to process or word this discontent of not being taught holistically. I was genuinely curious, but also confused as someone who was and is figuring themselves out. I always wondered, why didn't things feel complete? Why did things feel left out or strange? In my history classes, I asked questions like, why did the United States have an embargo on Cuba? Why did I never learn much about Korean or Vietnam War in middle school or high school? Why were rainforests being deforested? Who did this and why? Why were there so many wars we were involved in? These questions extended to other classes, and also I had conversations with my classmates about this stuff. We all wanted answers, but we never really got them until we were older. In my health class and physical science class, We learned how our body functions, but I never learned why my body and mind think the way they do or why I feel the way I do. I thought, why do I feel the way I do about my body? Why am I, and I didn't know the word at the time, queer? I looked at myself in the mirror and asked, why don't I like how I look? Is there something wrong with me? In English class, I asked other questions. Why don't we get to read stuff from people in my neighborhood? Why do we have to read stuff for a state exam or for national exams? Why don't we get more free writing time? Why don't we get to read the things that we as students want to read? What I learned was determined by state exams, geography, finances, and what my teachers and parental units and adults in my life could cover/tell me. Despite that, people and humans of all ages, I still believe are naturally curious. I think that's really captured in the Scholastic Book Fair, which is still remembered fondly by adults of all ages. In fact, there are some grown-ups that make adult versions of the Scholastic Book Fairs to recapture that exact joy. Scholastic Book Fairs are a place where kids could buy their favorite books. Obviously, access and finances come into question. Not everyone could afford or enjoy the book fair like I could. And even then, I did not always have the money to get every single thing I wanted. But it's remembered fondly because for me and others, those were moments where I got to learn truly unbothered. I was able to find what I wanted in my own education. Even if it was just Diary of the Wimpy Kid or the newest Percy Jackson book, I could pick up the latest guide on birds or nature instead of looking through the dry social studies textbook from 1987, which is falling apart. I had ownership over my knowledge and education, and vice versa. I was in a community of other people, aka kids and young adults, who wanted to learn just as much as I did. MindExplorer tingles my curiosity. It allows me to relate to older generations who grew up during the 80s and 90s and 2000, and who hold these books and multimedia projects, art, and other media in fond memory. It reminds us that curiosity is a human experience. Rather, no, it is the experience of being alive on this planet. And I understand why these memories are looked at fondly. It felt like a utopia because everything felt new and fresh, alongside some prosperity for some. It was an era before the world felt like it was falling apart, before we felt tragedy after tragedy and hopelessness after hopelessness. It was, all things considered, painted in rose-tinted glasses. Unfortunately, as we know, utopias don't exist. They are a dream. Utopian Scholastic likewise highlights the passion for education without pointing to the sour parts. But there were, and are, sour parts. Access to information is difficult due to class, language barriers, political discourse, and ability, amongst other factors in one's life or a community's life. Sometimes the history or education focuses on colonialist thinking and or oversimplifies the past in the effort of appearing quote-unquote more kid-friendly. But if your history, education, art, or any subject must remove huge swaths of humans who existed to paint a utopia, what does that say about that utopia you're trying to build? And better yet, what does that say about the aesthetic? That's not for me to answer, but for you to discover. And despite all that, MindExplorer is a hopeful and positive reminder of what knowledge can do for us. It reminds us that discovery and the joy of learning are something I think intrinsic to the human experience. We should create spaces where everyone can learn about who they are, what they are, and how they get about. Educational material should reflect the wide interest and experiences, not just of what a curriculum says or what is politically advantageous to those in positions of power. It should reflect the marginalized. It should reflect a diverse view of people's human experiences, and it should reflect hope. And if that means imagining it first, then I would happily explore my mind to do so. And if you want to explore your mind in the mind maze, feel free to check out MindExplorer, which is down below in the description box. And when you're done exploring your mind, how about you explore culture wars and every other topic related to that in my video on wokeness over here. Finally, a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, Harrison Parker and Paul Volpe, for your continued support. You too can support this channel at patreon.com/blurdydisposition for a 1-month donation. If not, you can also check out my Ko-fi over here if you want to support me one time. And as always, I'm your average everyday queer explorer, Blurry Disposition. You all have an amazing day. Ciao.